Sure, 6 years of support is nothing to sneeze at. The iPhone X came out in 2017. It is still technically getting iOS 16 updates in 2023. That's not bad by any means. And maybe I'm being greedy, that's for sure, but I still personally think the iPhone X should have got iOS 17, and I'll tell you why. Let's begin. So first off, there's no fine print anywhere. There's no official statement from Apple claiming that the iPhone you buy is guaranteed 5 or 6 or 7 years of software updates. I think a lot of people have that misconception based on all of the conversations I've had about this on Twitter. Lots of people seem to think that Apple promises 6 years. I've never seen that put in text or anywhere on their site or during their keynotes. They never put a firm number on software support. It's just always generally been much, much longer, usually twice as long as most Android phones. And kind of the weird thing about long-term software support is there tends to be a lot of gained features that only benefit more recent generation iPhones, and then a lot of features don't make it over to lower-end iPhones or older iPhones that have been around for several years because they don't have the hardware to support it, and a lot of the time that comes down to the silicon. Like my iPhone SE, for example, doesn't get that voice automation feature that lets you say a few phrases into your phone and then your phone can emulate your own voice using machine learning. Newer iPhones are getting that feature, but mine does not. And I believe similarly with a lot of how the animations work for name drop, it doesn't necessarily translate all that well to the older iPhones running iOS 17. But Apple has to make this call of okay, we're gonna support this device but not give it all of the flagship features, but when do we get to a point where the device no longer can run enough of the flagship features that we're gonna just flat out not support it anymore? And personally, while iOS 17 was a modest update and it has a decent number of new perks and benefits that everybody is excited to try out for themselves, I don't personally think that the biggest iOS 17 features would have been that hard to bring to the iPhone X. Yes, it has an A11 chip in it, which may not be as fast as an A12 or A13 chip, but I think a lot of the flagship features that Apple was boasting about when it came to iOS 17 were things like standby mode, being able to turn your device into a little nightstand when it's charging and on its side, and that is not a complicated piece of code. I don't think that requires a ton of RAM. I don't think that requires a ton of processing power. All it really requires the phone to do is understand that you are plugged in, you have power, and you are now tilted on your side. The iPhone X has an accelerometer. That's not that big a stretch, in my opinion. Simultaneously, they spent so much time at DubDub talking about stickers. In my opinion, not that incredibly complicated. I mean, there's the aspect of the subject lift stickers where you can start lifting subjects from your photos and turn them into stickers. iPhone X doesn't support subject lift, even though it still runs iOS 16. They were comfortable bringing iOS 16 to the iPhone X. So there's attributes of iOS 17 that I can understand not making the call, including the voicemail transcript feature where when someone's calling you, you can actually see what they're saying when they go to voicemail on your lock screen. That probably requires a certain amount of neural cores that the A11 chip wasn't rocking, but I feel like a lot of people, at least these days, aren't relying on phone calls and voicemail all that much in the age of texting. And again, it's not like you have to ensure that iOS 17 ships with every single new feature for the oldest generation hardware, because there's still a lot of things that Apple will leave out, even though those older devices may run the latest software. And perhaps interactive widgets could be a bit debatable, like maybe that requires more than 3 gigabytes of RAM, but personally, I've been seeing interactive widgets on Android, which has horrible RAM management, for the past 6-7 years, so I'm convinced that it's not that complicated of a software perk, and it's something that absolutely I think the iPhone X is capable of doing. It was just, I'm guessing, easier for Apple on the software team to just say, let's cut off all the devices rocking 3 gigs of RAM, and that way we have less devices to optimize for, but in my opinion, it shouldn't be that hard because they're still supporting the iPhone XS and the iPhone 11 Pro, both of which are rocking the exact same size and pixel resolution of the original iPhone X. And part of me, I guess, feels a little bit upset that the iPhone X is being discontinued because it was the first $1,000 iPhone, and Apple sold iPads back in 2014 and 2015 that were only $500 that got 7 or 8 years of software support for only $500, and they continued bringing new features to them year after year after year. Even if they didn't get all of the latest and greatest iPadOS features, they still gave them a handful of new iMessage and Mail perks and Safari privacy features as the years went on, even though it would have been perfectly acceptable, I think, for most people to say the iPad stopped getting updates after 6 or 7 years. No, Apple didn't stop there. They went all the way to 8. Now we're talking about an OLED phone that still honestly looks fairly similar to how iPhones do today. iPhone 10 kind of reimagined gesture control and the way we use our phones, and we're still using our phones differently because of that design. And because of the price point, I think it totally should have at least gotten 7 years, maybe 8. But I guess in Apple's world, it was just too weakened by that A11 chip. And yes, I very much feel like I dodged a bullet because there were rumors that iOS 17 was going to drop the iPhone 10. And because I was rocking the iPhone 10 at the time, I was like, okay, like, I love this phone, but I want to make sure that I can access and review iOS 17 for you guys when it comes out. That heavily influenced my decision to switch to the iPhone SE 2. Turns out my hunch turned out to be correct, so I'm no longer sporting the iPhone 10, but I feel bad for so many people out there that are still rocking the 8 and the 8 Plus. I'm still kind of missing those landscape home screens that we got on the 8 Plus, so I kind of understand why Apple wanted to ditch that phone, because there was basically nothing else out there rocking a 1080p 16:9 display. The 8 Plus was kind of the last of its kind. The iPhone 8 has the exact same screen size and resolution as the SE3, which came out like just a year ago, so I feel like optimizing for that also shouldn't be too hard if they're still supporting the SE2 and SE3. And the last reason I'll bring up as to why I think iOS 17 should have made it at least to the iPhone 10 is the fact that iOS 16 already killed support for a lot of iPhones all at once, including the iPhone 7 series and the iPhone 6s series. And in the past, after Apple had killed off support for a lot of devices, that's usually when they would do a big update, just focus on stability and letting older phones die on a good software version that was well optimized and bug-free. And I feel like that's what iOS 17 could have been for the iPhone 10. Maybe not so much feature-packed full of name drop or voicemail transcribing features, but focus more on a stability update and making sure that the iPhone 10 ends on a good note, because honestly, iOS 16, at least for a lot of people out there, has been very unreliable and very buggy, and it worked okay for me, but I definitely heard a lot of complaining about how unstable iOS 16 was, and that was definitely a top requested feature of iOS 17, was just a stability update, kind of like how iOS 12 was for the iPhone 6 series. And the fact that the iPhone 10 and the 8 series is gonna die with kind of a buggy, not so stable release, that kind of sits wrong with me, but Apple is a company. At the end of the day, I guess they gotta motivate us to buy and use the latest and greatest phones, right? So I'm sure Apple engineers know more about this than I do, and you guys can feel free to correct me with how difficult it would be to activate standby mode on an iPhone 10 down in the comments below. But overall, I still think it totally could have been done. Thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.